Alright, picture this. You're standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, gazing out over one of the most breathtaking landscapes on Earth. The sheer cliffs, the winding Colorado River, the layers of rock telling a story billions of years old. But then imagine something different. Instead of a vast, empty canyon, you see an endless, shimmering expanse of water stretching as far as the eye can see. No cliffs, no dusty trails, just waves, ripples, and maybe even a few dolphins jumping for dramatic effect. So here's the question. What if we filled the Grand Canyon with water? Would it actually become an ocean? And more importantly, what would happen next? Now, before we go full mad scientist and start pumping in water from the nearest ocean, let's get some perspective. The Grand Canyon is massive. We're talking about a chasm that's over a mile deep, up to 18 miles wide, and about 277 miles long. If you scooped it up and plopped it over the eastern US, it would stretch from Washington, D.C. to New York City. That's a lot of real estate. And the big question is, can we even fill it? Well, that depends on where we're getting our water. If we magically teleported the Atlantic Ocean and poured some of it in, sure, it would fill up quickly. But if we're relying on, say, the Colorado River, well, let's just say we'll be waiting a long, long time. But let's say we did fill it up, whether by melting glaciers, diverting oceans, or by summoning Poseidon himself. Would the Grand Canyon actually become an ocean? Or would we just be left with a very deep, very weird lake? First things first, let's talk about volume. The Grand Canyon can hold an estimated 5 quadrillion gallons of water. That's 5 million billion gallons. Sounds like a lot, right? Well, for reference, that's only about half of 1% of the Atlantic Ocean's total volume. In other words, filling up the Grand Canyon wouldn't make much of a dent in the world's oceans, but for all intents and purposes, it would create a truly massive inland sea. But let's be clear, an ocean is not just any big body of water. Oceans have tides, deep water currents, and most importantly, they're connected to the rest of the world's water systems. If we just dumped a bunch of water into the Grand Canyon and sealed it off, it wouldn't behave like an ocean. It would behave like an oversized bathtub. There'd be no tides unless we figured out a way to let the moon's gravitational pull affect it. No ocean currents, and unless we made some adjustments, no way for the water to circulate properly. Alright, so let's assume we did a good enough job filling the canyon. Would marine life move in? Well, yes and no. If we used fresh water, we'd be looking at a giant lake, not an ocean. That means freshwater species like catfish, trout, and maybe even some adventurous alligators would eventually find a home. But if we used salt water, that's where things get tricky. Most ocean species are highly dependent on salinity levels, temperature, and deep sea pressure. Even though the Grand Canyon is deep, it's not nearly deep enough to mimic real ocean conditions. Plus, without a connection to any other oceans, fish and marine mammals would have to be introduced artificially. So, unless we go full Noah's Ark and start dumping whales, sharks, and sea turtles in there, it's unlikely we'd see a thriving ocean ecosystem. But let's be optimistic. Let's say somehow we figured out the chemistry and our Grand Canyon ocean became a thriving marine paradise. That leads us to another huge problem: evaporation. Here's where things get a little uncomfortable. The American Southwest is hot, just dry, and it's not exactly the most ideal place to maintain an ocean. Water evaporates fast in desert climates, and without a continuous influx of fresh water, our hypothetical sea would start to shrink, and fast. Take the Salton Sea in California, for example. It was created by accident in the early 1900s when engineers accidentally diverted the Colorado River. It quickly filled up and looked like it was going to be a permanent inland sea, until the water levels started dropping. Today, it's a shrinking, overly salty, kind of toxic lake with barely enough oxygen to support fish. And that's what would happen to the Grand Canyon Ocean if we weren't constantly refilling it. Even worse, The evaporation would mess with local weather patterns. A massive new body of water in the middle of the desert would likely lead to increased rainfall, shifting climates, and potentially creating a new weather system altogether. Phoenix might start getting monsoons, and the Grand Canyon itself might end up covered in mist or frequent storms. Cool in theory, but a logistical nightmare. Now, let's say we wanted to make this thing work. Could we turn it into a usable resource? Could we farm fish, create a thriving tourist industry, or even use it as a giant water reservoir for the drought-prone Southwest? Technically, yes, but it wouldn't be easy. If we kept it freshwater, it could become one of the largest reservoirs in the world, providing water to millions of people. But that also means we'd have to manage inflow and outflow carefully. Otherwise, the water would just sit there, slowly turning into an algae-filled mess. If we went with salt water, we'd need a system to keep it from stagnating. Maybe a giant canal connecting it to the Pacific? Maybe enormous pumps moving water back and forth? The engineering challenges alone would be absurd. And let's not forget, if we did connect it to the ocean, we'd have to deal with tides, potential flooding, and the occasional surprise shark showing up where tourists weren't expecting it. So what's the takeaway from all this? Could we fill the Grand Canyon with water? Sure, if we wanted to. Would it actually become an ocean? Not really. It would be an enormous, self-contained sea at best, a stagnant mess at worst, and an absolute nightmare to maintain no matter what. But hey, it's fun to think about. And the next time you're standing at the edge of the canyon, just imagine what it would look like filled to the brim with water, waves crashing against the walls, the occasional seagull flying by. It might not be practical, but it's one heck of a mental image. And if you like this ridiculous yet fascinating deep dive, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more absurd science questions, and let me know in the comments, what other crazy hypothetical should we explore next? Until next time, keep questioning the impossible.